Hello and welcome to the Festival of Place Climate Resilience to this session on decarbonizing the Crown Estate. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the director and of the Festival of Place and editor-in-chief of the developer. Our purpose is to come together to learn and be inspired by the work taking place to mitigate climate risks. Thanks to our partners for supporting this event, Civic, a team of system thinkers in the built environment whose services include built environment engineering, transport, heritage, archaeology, sustainability, and place-based consultancies. And thank you to our organization members for making all our work possible. If you love this event, you will love our in-person Festival of Place on the 10th of June in London with speakers, including author of Feminist City, Leslie Kern, and Olympic cyclist and Walking and Cycling Commissioner Chris Boardman, and more. A reminder also that the entries to our sister awards program, The Pineapples, is open. So please check out the categories on pineapples.co.uk. Thepineapples.co.uk, I should say. There might only be pineapples on pineapples.co.uk. We will be taking your questions actually throughout this session, so please use the Q&A tab at any time in the chat window during the session to type those questions in. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lamé Vert, Sustainability Director of Net Zero at the Crown Estate. Lamé is an award-winning energy executive and co-founder of Lean In Equity and Sustainability Lines, an independent global gender diversity and inclusion social impact organization with a wealth of knowledge and over 25 years experience in the energy transition and decarbonization. She has traversed the industry value chain across the globe. She is currently the director of Net Zero at the Crown Estate in the UK and recently served on the World Economic Forum Global Future Council for Energy Transition. She also sits on the US nonprofit Equitable Origin Board and is a trustee of the UK charity Green Alliance. Her leadership and influence in these roles is significant and instrumental in fostering transparent, equitable, sustainable energy and natural resource development. So please join me with some emoji applause as Lamé joins me on the stage to tell you more. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
It's really great to have you here. And I know we're going to run this as a kind of a chat, but we have some slides, to kind of illustrate our conversation. So I wanted to start out with the Crown Estate is such a huge thing. And maybe you could talk a little bit to your role there, which I know is built environment and also in energy as well. So I think it would be great to start with you telling us a little bit about what it is that you do.
All right, thank you very much, Christine, and the team of Festival of Place. So the Crown Estate, for those who don't know much about it, is more than real estate. So we have a very eclectic portfolio, which ranges from our London real estate, Regent Street, Kensington Gardens, and a few things around there. But we also have a regional portfolio, which is made up of business parks, industrial park, retail parks, and that's kind of the built environment. And then we've got our marine sectors, which ranges from leasing the seabed for offshore wind, mineral aggregates, linear assets, so basically pipelines and cables that sit on the seabed. We're also custodians of 50% of the foreshore and the coastal line, so which is also there you have marinas and ports, and so it's everything and anything in between. And then we've got our Windsor and rural portfolio, which is encompasses the Great Windsor Great Park, but also 200,000 acres of tenant farmland. So across that portfolio, my role is to really bring our decarbonization strategy to life and kind of take it from strategy into action. And part of that action basically came to life last week, Thursday, at the Blue Earth Summit, where we launched our approach to decarbonization in terms of how we're decarbonizing our business, but also contributing to the UK net zero and decarb ambition. So in a nutshell, I kind of sit at the top of the T of the enterprise. And then we've got three business units: urban, rural, Windsor, and the marine sector. Yeah.
So I
And I'll
think
pop the
probably,
link to the report for those who will pick it up. Yeah.
oh, great. Yeah, that would be really useful. I think probably, I mean, it's an incredibly huge portfolio. Probably good to hear about what is the vision. You talk about decarbonization. Is it a net zero target? And how is that measured? What does success look like in terms of decarbonization?
So for us, we've set two timelines. So I don't want to use the word target because I think, we're all in a moving target world at the moment, but we've got a timeline for 2030 where we want to get most of our carbon emissions down to up to 42% by 2030 and then down to 90% by 2050. And then the 10% residual, we're already starting work now to think about what that carbon dioxide removal activity will be so we can build the critical mass today before we get to 2050, because if you leave it too long, by the time you get to 2049, you're slightly too late in that game. So we are working through the different hierarchy of carbon abatement and then also thinking about removal from that perspective. So we are twin tracking, if that makes sense, in terms of decarbonizing the assets we own and control, influencing the assets that we are kind of in the zone of influence, and then looking to support the nascent market of CDRO to make sure that that net zero equation comes to zero in 2050, but knowing that there will be different checkpoints along the way.
When I hear about the kind of span of works, I start to think, well, where do you start? Are there low-hanging fruit across this portfolio that you think, okay, well, we just need to do this bit, or is it really focused down in the detail of every project? I mean, from what we've discussed in the past, it feels like there's a lot of detailed work going on across the entire estate. But it would be good to hear from you whether whether there's still big, what are the big moves being made, and then we can kind of move, because I know we're going to talk about some of the detailed moves around pilot projects in the built environment. So what are the big moves, I guess, across the portfolio?
So I think overall, and this is not a Crown Estate premise, I think everywhere globally and every sector has probably done all of the low-hanging fruits by now. And so all of that low-hanging fruits would have stayed in your kind of operating cost element in your kind of delivery. We're now moving into the capital expenditures phase of decarbonization, which is kind of, taking out a boiler and putting a heat pump. That is a capital investment versus, changing your LED light bulb. So that is pretty much where we're all at in terms of the real estate side of things. In terms of the other parts of the portfolio, we've got areas where there's huge opportunity. So for example, in our rural estate, we have a lot of opportunity there to do more nature recovery, where there is high nature, there is low carbon, and nature was a great carbon sequestrator, right, before humans came along. So we have areas where we have huge opportunities and we will be pursuing that, but also where we have physical control, especially in the built environment, we will be looking at decarbonizing those assets one by one or in clusters, depending on the timelines. But we have to now really go in and take out the carbon emission fuel and put in electrification. Because if you think about it, 80% of the buildings that will be here by 2050 are already here. And so you cannot really say we're going to rebuild everything. So you might be able to build a net zero building today from scratch because you'll be using new materials and you'll be putting in the learnings. But when you're retrofitting and fixing historical heritage buildings, there's a bit more challenge in what you can do from a regulatory perspective and in what is available today. So an example of what we've done actually with our heritage buildings, the engineering team worked with a startup to innovate around the style of windows that the heritage buildings and historical buildings need to have from a planning perspective, but still delivering the efficiency and the insulation that you need in today's world. And so that is something that we're really enabling the sectors and seeing where we can pilot projects or materials in our retrofit work, in our development pipeline, and just making sure that we're bringing the sector and the industry with us on that journey together, because it's going to be really tricky to get the built environment to net zero without that collaboration and partnership with the supply chain as well.
How do you encourage that transition, with the partners that you work with, the supply chain and all the way down to the, perhaps end user, how how are there mechanisms that you use to encourage everyone along the chain to participate?
So I've just moved my slide to the big example on this one. So New Zealand House is a redevelopment. It's just up the road from our office in St. James's Market. And it's a historic building. It's been there since maybe late 50s, early 60s. And so what we did here was part of the development approval was that we were going to include embodied carbon, which was to drive innovation in the space. So then you're using better materials, lighter materials, recycled materials, and all of those great things. And so we put that embodied carbon target onto the contract. So the main contractor owns 100% of the target. But what they then did was to take the target and let's say, look, this is the supply chain. Each and every one of you is contributing to this embodied carbon for the project. And this is your slice of the pie. And so if you reduce that target, there is a carrot. And if you don't meet it, there is a discount. So it's kind of like you then had a leaderboard as well. And so it became kind of like a gamification. And so the whole supply chain really leaned into it, really acted on it, and it drove down the delivery of carbon on that one project. But on the social side, what that project also did was to allow for apprentices to come in, because also, the green skill piece is also very important in delivering the decarbonization scale of work that needs to happen. And so they really combine that carbon mentality and carbon discipline, but also providing opportunity for young talent to come on site and learn and develop the skill set that we need for the future. So it's a really great example when you, as the asset owner, you're working with your supply chain and they work with their, second, third level suppliers as well, that everyone is driving in the same direction and you really get better outcome. And so, yeah, so that's one example of how you can do it using targets. This, in this scenario, we use embodied carbon, and then encouraging the supply chain to lean in and do that with you.
So when you say there was a carrot, is that a financial bonus if they reached their targets?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the discount likewise was the other
It's also
way. And that
financial. Yeah. So it's the same amount. So you get X if you did it, and you get minus X if you didn't. So it was just, but it wasn't punitive. It was just an incentive to get that competition going, right? So people like to win the leaderboard. So it drove the right behavior. And in this scenario, I would say it was a really good example when you pull together as a team of developers and suppliers to deliver a project, you can really get that good outcome.
I know we spoke before. You said you are seeing tenants demanding greener buildings. Is that in the commercial sector? I mean, can you speak a little bit about the end user appetite for greener offices? And greener by
So
which I
this
mean
is
lower carbon.
yeah, so
Mhm.
this is a research that's been done by JLL, and we've also got some input from kind of the analyst side of the world. So many customers, the demand for low carbon spaces has definitely gone up. So if you're getting a new tenant into a commercial space, they would want to see that energy efficiency as a minimum. And of course, the carbon delivery in terms of if the boiler or if it's a heat pump, are you electrifying? So that demand is definitely on the rise overall in the commercial real estate space. What is interesting in the other research that we got was that whilst customers may not pay the green premium yet, even though they are demanding it, but they will give you a brand discount. So if you're a commercial real estate owner, it's almost like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So you need to create the low carbon spaces because the demand is there, but you're not getting the green premium for it yet. But they will discount your space because it's too brown. So, and I've seen commercial tenants, not the Crown Estate tenants, but businesses that we work with who have moved offices in recent time because the new building was more efficient, and so it's a market change that is coming or has come, so to speak, and so we need to take that into consideration, because what you don't want to have as a commercial real estate owner is to have assets at risk. We're in another kind of a roundtable back in February, GRI, and a lot of the investors were saying that they would not take a meeting if the building or the asset doesn't come with a sustainability plan, right? Because they know that in 25 years, if they cannot do something with it, then they have assets at risk or stranded assets, and nobody really wants to make that kind of investment knowing that it will strand. And so it's now really almost like a business imperative to ensure that your spaces are becoming greener and becoming more energy efficient, more carbon, lower carbon spaces, and also green as well, right? So putting urban greenery and plants and making sure that you're bringing nature into the urban spaces is also becoming a really top ask from a well-being perspective. Yeah.
I think that's interesting because it kind of turns the investment on its head. You're not necessarily investing to increase the amount of rent that you're going to be getting. You're you're kind of mitigating again, like the kind of future risk. It's a different way of thinking. Is that a challenge in and of itself when it comes to funding these projects, that you're kind of using a different kind of spreadsheet? You're trying to guess what the discount on this property the future discount will be, um, versus the investment.
So, so interestingly, I'm not sure they've modeled the discount, but what you find is that when you go into those meetings, so whether you're the investor or the customer side, if they're asking you certain questions that you do not have the answer to, right? It just kind of tells itself already in that conversation. So on the modeling side, the way we look at our investments opportunity and our development pipeline and everything we do, right, at the Crown Estate, we look at it through 4 strategic pillars. So is that thing, that investment, that asset, that delivery, is it delivering for net zero? Is it delivering for nature? Is it delivering for people? And how much economic returns can we return back to treasury? So those are kind of how we look at life. And so we also have the unique position being a quasi entity to be able to take some longer term view on projects. And so whilst financial returns is needed to continue to invest, we also prioritize other levels of sustainability, so nature, climate, and people in that, so that you have a more holistic decision-making mechanism to do that. So, but if you're a pure investor and that's kind of the only lens you've got, then making an investment today for a space that will be stranded in 25 years probably changes their viewpoint. And so when they say we won't even take the meeting because there is no decarb plan, then that tells you a lot about the train has left the station, and therefore we just need to kind of keep delivering these low carbon spaces, especially in the commercial real estate for now. I mean, the domestic real estate or residential is a little bit more tricky because the housing stock is more varied and you have more customers to deal with versus when it's commercial. So, but we're really positive and really hopeful that the market and the sector is heading in the right direction. And as I said, you will see some of those examples in our updated report from last Thursday, which kind of gives a status, what I call, this is where we are today, and this is where we would like to go, and we would like to work with the sectors. We want the customer voices in our plans. We want to make sure that we leave no one behind, right? That's the whole premise of just transition. And so this report for us is very monumental in the sense that it gives us that baseline of activities and bringing everything into one place so that we can have conversations like this, we can engage with the sector, we can talk to our customers, we can talk to our stakeholders, and also enable the supply chain. And I'll just come on the supply chain now, because I think we forget that the supply chain is also made up of 80% SMEs. And so we really need to work with them to ensure that they stay long enough in the supply chain to help us deliver this scale of ambition. So helping the supply chain to also deliver on their scope 1 and 2 makes it easier for all of us who are in the scope 3 phase to then be having credible input from them in terms of reporting scope 3. But rather than starting with scope 3, I think we need to be enabling them to deliver on their scope 1 and 2, because that is within their sphere of control, and they can manage that through their energy, water, waste, fuel. They can control that. And then once they've done that, we know that scope 3 tends to resolve itself in time, but sometimes
I'm
we
going to
tend
make
to
you
keep
do
it.
a really boring thing and explain scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, just for anyone who doesn't know those
Yes.
terms.
Yes. So scope 1 and 2 are the scopes or emissions out of your operations. So one will be your direct emissions in your kind of buildings, in the fuel on in your car, and then the second one will be in things that you procure, but also fits into your operations. Whereas your scope 3 is further downstream. It's things around your customer using your product, and for your employees commuting to work. All of those things will be examples of your scope 3. But the energy that I will procure for my factory will be in my scope 2, because I'm buying it from somebody else. But the fuel and the vehicle that I use and the tractor would be my scope 1 if I was doing that activity. So it's just
So you're saying these
how
small
the
businesses have no control over how someone tenant in the building is then going to use this
yeah.
product. So it's not fair to impose those emissions on them. They really have very little capacity to
To
influence.
make that change. Yeah. But they
Mhm.
can change the
Uh,
fuel that they use in the operation. They can change the way they operate their own business to drive down their own footprint, right? So once you know your footprint, you drive that down. Then if everyone did that, so, think about it, then scope 3 that we need to manage becomes slightly smaller, because
mhm.
everyone's scope 1 and 2 is somebody else's scope 3. So
Yeah. When you're looking at those 4 pillars, because I know, it's really fundamental to the decision making. Are the 4 pillars supposed to be equal, or can you have one that's delivering for net zero, but maybe isn't delivering as big a return? Kind of they look very equal when they're kind of laid out, but, how does that work? Can you dial one up and one down when it comes to values?
yeah, so the premise of the 4 pillars is, for simple math, they should always add up to 100%. But we recognize that they will not all deliver in the same quantum of, so it's not a 40, 40, 40. But knowing where you are making the trade-off across the 4 is where that good decision making becomes really evident, because you're making a strategic choice to dial up something else. Again, it's the opportunity cost, right? There's no doing nothing is not free, right? There's an opportunity cost of every decision and every choice organizations make. And so for us, those 4 pillars really helps us to think things through and then make the strategic choices and decisions to move things forward. But yes, they don't have to be equal 25% across board, but it must add up to 100. Otherwise, the math is not mathing, right? So
So show me a
yeah.
few. You've got a few other pilot projects to share with us. I'm interested in other projects you've
Yeah,
been working
pick
on.
one. Which one do you want to talk about? Should we go to St. James's Market? St.
Yeah.
James, that's that one there. So this one, funny enough, just to kind of dovetail from what we've just discussed, was one that we led from a carbon perspective. So it was driven by net zero decision. So we went for the scheme that delivered the best carbon outcome versus financial return or anything else, because it was a complex building, and there were many schemes that came through, and I lose the number. My colleague Kyle is the brain of the team, but they went through multiple variation of schemes to then demonstrate that you can do a retrofit project in London and drive carbon discipline. And so this was one of those projects that we're really proud of in terms of how we arrived at that decision. We took a carbon leadership on this project decision, and that informed the design and then the final scheme that went for approval.
So when you are doing it as a carbon priority, that includes the embodied operational all aspects of carbon.
Yeah, all aspects of carbon, and on this project as well, because it was kind of a first of a kind approach in terms of taking those four pillars to make a business decision, basically. We also took on voluntary peer review, tested the alternatives, had industry experts come in and critique the work. So then we were not just kind of existing in our own purist world. So we recognized that it was a different approach, but we wanted to stress test the mechanisms that we've got or designed to see what comes out on the other side. And the scheme for this project was one that we're really proud of because we took it through a rigorous process and also opened ourselves up for peer review and critique from industry experts to help shape that decision. So, we could have taken
Yeah,
a
and so
different
this is like
decision,
you're
but the
saying
one we,
this was a really hard test for net zero. So we're going to do the hardest thing that we can
yeah,
and see if this is
yeah,
feasible.
yeah.
And the
So
and
this was
the
a,
and
you were talking about, sorry, you were talking about low hanging fruits, right? So the lowest hanging fruits will be demolish and start again, and you build it to be net zero, right? So,
yeah.
but it was a very hard decision, and we made a choice to not shy away from the difficulty of the decision or the choice. And maybe the final decision could have still been, you know, different, but we went through the pain and the challenge and grew from it as well, right? We all kind of grew from that experience, and it's been a really beacon of how you can do things differently and drive change without compromising your values and your purpose as an entity as well. So, yeah.
Do you think it
So I would
was
say we showed a lot of ability leadership there.
do you think there was a real perception before that that this was impossible in a historical building?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you've been around long enough to know that it's not possible is the easiest phrase you will find in any space. You find a problem with every solution, and those kind of challenges will always be there. But I think because we were all aligned on the purpose, on the value of the organization, it was easy to bring people on that journey and align. I mean, it will take time to kind of bring people on a journey, but once you get them on board and they understand the why and the what, the how tends to emerge once everybody is aligned on the why and the what, and yeah. So that was a good one.
There's a question that's come in from Michelle Morrison, who is a sustainability officer at Advanced Northumberland. Across your vast and varied portfolio, where are you finding it the most challenging to deliver against your net zero strategy? And how do you approach that challenge?
So it's a little bit of a trick question because they're all challenging, right? So I think every sector is facing an enormous amount of headwinds. But what we're trying to do is not shy away from the challenge, is also taking a sector-based lens. So if you read the report, you will see that we've taken a sector-based lens. So we've got our renewable energy, and that pathway will be different from our mineral aggregates, and it will be very different from our land trajectory and then built environment, because we recognize that each of those sectors will have their own nuance and unique challenges that we need to address specifically for that sector. So we're not taking an enterprise approach in decarbonization. We're taking a sector-based approach in building the decarb plan bottom up with the sector, with the customer, with the stakeholders, so that it is an informed plan that you can actually also deliver, right? So it's I would say it's a little bit of a trick question because not one is more challenging than the other. I think the challenge is, so it's like we're all in the same storm, but we're in different vessels, if that makes sense. So it's that phrase of we're not all, yeah. So we're not all in the same boat from a challenge perspective, but we are definitely all in the same storm, and the vessel and the boats that we're using is very different to kind of navigate that storm.
And the headwinds that you're experiencing are investment-based headwinds, would you say?
Oh, it's everything. Do you read the news? It's everything. It's everything, everything. But I think, jokes apart, is I was sharing in Blue Earth Summit last week. At the end of the day, this is not decarbonization for decarbonization's sake. If we take the triple bottom line and you're starting with people, planet, and profit, we're talking a lot about the profit and the planet, save the planet. But if we leave the people behind, then we haven't actually done a good job from a decarb perspective. And so I'm taking a more people-centric lens to the work that we're doing to make sure that we leave no one behind. Because if this doesn't translate into lives and livelihoods, then those headwinds even become more challenging. So it's about bringing that civil society along on the journey. It's about bringing your customers, your stakeholders, and even more so now your employees, right? So employees are voting with their feet and want to work in purpose-led organizations, want to say that you're adding value to society. So yeah, so the headwinds, I think, is varied, but is we're very alive to that, and we're adjusting the plans and building the plans in conjunction with the sectors and the people in the sectors, because we can also pretend that we understand all the pain points, because the best person to tell you where the pain is the one wearing the shoe. And so leaning into that and learning from that, we're humble enough to learn from the sector and the person wearing the shoes, so that we're making better informed decisions. Because at the end of the day, I think, we don't know what we don't know, but when we know better, we do better. So
You've talked, I know you've worked in the residential sector before, and we've talked about relationships with tenants. You've mentioned that housing in particular is challenging. Do you think we're listening enough to people in their homes? And can you speak a little bit to the challenges of language? I think from our conversations around net zero and the pillars to actual community engagement with tenants. And I know that might not be the priority of the work at the moment that you brought along to discuss, but I also know your broader experience with people in their
yeah.
homes as well.
Yeah, so before joining the Crown Estate, I was kind of on the solution side, but retail, utility. And one of the things I used to say to my colleagues is, if you go to Jane and Joe Public and you're talking about decarbonizing their house and getting the house to net zero, it kind of goes over their head very quickly. Well, everyone understands a warm home, a hot shower, and a cold drink, right? So if we can bring the conversation to language that they can relate to language that means something in their life today, right? So winter is coming, and if people have to choose between fuel and food, and you're talking decarbonization and net zero, it's like you're not in the same context at all, right? Ab initio.
Mhm.
So I think there is something about us in the space who are the experts. We sometimes tend to speak in an echo chamber, and we use too many acronyms and too many shortcuts, which helps us to get by in the day job, but unfortunately leaves the civil society behind again, right? Because if we can tell them what is in it for them, what is the benefit for them, then I think you lose them very quickly in the conversation. They just don't engage because they have other priorities and other pressing needs to address. But if, at least if you look at the European housing stock, and UK seems to have one of the lower quality housing stock just because of the way it's been designed, then there is more work to be done to retrofit existing buildings. Like I said, if 80% of them are already here, so we have no choice. So, in my last job, my colleague Grant used to say, you've got to reduce waste. Before you even start thinking decarb, how do you reduce energy waste? Reduce the waste, reduce the load, then you can decarb, because otherwise you also oversize your decarb plan, right? So it's those kind of simple things. How do I make your house more warm, not more efficient, because you might lose half the crowd when you use that language? How can I make your house more warm? How can I save you money because you're now using less energy in your house because it's warmer? How can I help you get to where you need to get to by getting your the rating from a D to a C or from an E to a B, then they get that because that's a regulatory requirement that all houses need to get to. So you're meeting them where they are at and you're having the right conversation with them because, I want to decarbonize your house. Okay, thank you very much. Who's going to pay for it? It's going to be the next person. Thank you very much.
It really tallies with our
So,
previous speaker was Catherine Butler, who's a social scientist, and she talked about not using the word retrofit ever. She talked about transforming homes, and she also talked about going into people's houses,
yeah,
and there was no evidence of mold because they clean it every week, and you have to have a long listening conversation to get to the point where you realize actually this is something they're having to clean up every single week, and so there is a problem there, but may not be visible, may not be talked about. You need a relationship to maybe even find out about it. But that's like a very personal, real thing that you'd like to stop doing, I'm sure, as a resident, to stop having to clean this
yeah.
up. Mhm.
So clean because
Uh,
that's productive time that you could be using to do something else. So if you did this and you didn't have to clean every week and spend 2 hours every week, it's 2 hours that you can spend with your kids. It's 2 hours that you can do some self-development. So you kind of make it tangible,
mhm.
because if people buy from people, right? So you have to build that trust, you've got to build that engagement, you've got to meet them where they're at and go into their houses as you've just described on their own turf, and also make it easy, right? The other challenge I used to kind of describe to my colleagues back in my previous life was even I, who worked in the sector, used to struggle to even think about how I could decarbonize my own home because there was no one-stop shop to get everything. So you go over here and you get the wheel and then the steering, and then maybe someday you get the engine. It's kind of like, okay, I don't really want to be an engineer, right? When I take my phone and I'm going around and it's pinging from the different G's, 3, 4, 5, I don't worry about it because it's just happening. All I care about is that my phone is working. Okay, I might drop a call or two because single signal is lost, but as a user, do I really care the interoperability of the towers? No, I don't. I don't have to worry about that because that's somebody else's problem. But when it comes to energy and energy efficiency and the energy transition, we suddenly want the civil society to also become engineers. And I think that's where we've kind of missed the messaging a little bit, and we haven't
And the
leveraged
messaging, which I love what you said, which is the messaging, which is a warm home, a cold drink, a hot shower.
I know, not hot shower. Everyone gets that, So it's an easy proposition, but we haven't articulated that proposition over the course of the decade where energy transition has become a big topic. And so, we're doing a pilot project and it's not on the deck, but because you can now do it with new developments where, it's a partnership with Octopus, you build a house and you make sure it has all that technology from day one. And so you can actually build the house to be zero bills from day one because it's got solar, it's got heat pump, it's got batteries, it's got everything it needs to function as a unit. And so when you buy into that kind of property, you don't have to then worry about being an engineer. So it's easier to do on new build, slightly more difficult in retrofit. And so how do we make retrofitting existing buildings easier for the customer and the consumer to be able to adopt and engage in the process? It's where
Mm.
we've got to tweak language a little bit and just speak in plain English.
There's a question from Peter Runacres, who's head of urban futures at Earls Court Development Company. Have you noticed any shift in attitudes since the re-election of the US president and the same shift by other UK parties? You have net zero in your job title.
I
So,
do. I'm not
that
going anywhere anytime soon. No, I mean, jokes apart, it's in my job title, but it's also in the UK law, right? Net zero is enshrined in the UK law. So while as part of those, you've got political headwinds, but I think for businesses that are committed and long term, those headwinds, the political ones, and those changes will come and go. But if you did this retrofit project in St. James's Market, it's not for a 4-year run, right? It's a long-term project. that would deliver value even in the longer term. So in terms of attitude, the demand for low carbon spaces is not changing, because the attitude and the expectation from customers is that, I mean, seriously, there is no solar, there is no battery, there is no heat pump. So it's the attitude and the consumer behavior is already shifting. So whilst things might slow down globally in terms of the conversation we're having today, some of the train has actually left the station. The investments have been made. So I don't think they would change drastically. They may slow down, they may change language and terminology, but if your house is still cold in the winter, your house is still going to be cold in the winter. So anything that makes your house warmer in the winter, it's a welcome, right? So it's how we sell the value proposition to the customers, I think, is where we need to do some work as a sector. Yeah.
We've heard, or I've heard before, that the grid is not ready for full electrification, or there are issues with the grid, that the grid is too slow, or that there are challenges. I mean, there's been a huge amount of investment from the Crown Estate into wind. Are there concerns about the grid? Are these valid concerns? Is the national grid moving fast enough, or is there something we need to be aware of?
So as an economist, with every challenge comes opportunity, right? So I think there's opportunity to, expand the grid, modernize the grid, but there are also opportunities for off-grid solutions and behind the meter solutions. So it's where innovation and kind of pioneers in terms of people who understand what the sector needs. So if you think about maybe Australia, California, for example, they have very poor grid system, they have very poor connectivity, and so they've had to innovate very quickly to keep energy access reliable for the people. And so we can law that says that we have to do everything from scratch and new, right? So we can borrow shamelessly and share seamlessly the learnings. And I think there is, a big push now to kind of look across the pond and see what others are doing and how might we get there quicker using what we already have. Because what you want is to oversize the future grid, and then everyone goes behind the meter, right? So it's about balancing how you green the supply, because we want to electrify as much as we can. So electrify transport, electrify heating, electrify buildings. So you want that supply to be green, or as green as possible. And then there'll be things that you just cannot electrify today. And so you need to look at what different molecules versus the electrons that are currently available to kind of balance out, the demand. So you need green electrons to clean out the energy system, but you also need some green molecules to balance those things that will not be electrifiable, at least not yet. And then you kind of build from there. But there are big case studies and use cases that we can take from Australia and California to kind of see how we do things differently. Or imitation is the best form of flattery, they say, no? So
Well, and
we
you've
can
talked about
learn.
a lot of partnerships. I think many of these pilot projects are partnerships in one way or another, but working with Octopus, and working with smaller developers as well. I've seen there's kind of collaborations with people like Town on the cards, and other. So I guess that is a question. You talked about the kind of supply chain, but also, what do you see as important? Yeah, in terms of that kind of collaboration. Oh, yeah, tell me about this project.
Yeah, so Windsor and Rural is an example that I really like to share, because it's quite old and it's very heritage, but we're doing a lot of innovation and doing a lot of new things in our Windsor portfolio. So you can see we've got some solar panels, we've got heat pump. We've also, we use the field for temporary leasing for activities, and before now they would come with diesel generators. And the last leads that we had out, they had hydrogen fuel cell generators. And so partnership and collaboration for us is not only about the delivery, but also showing the art of the possible. being able to use hydrogen fuel cell generators in Windsor Great Park for a temporary site to displace diesel, that is a game changer, right? And we've got a ground mounted solar farm ish. It's small, but it's a farm for us just next to our Saville Garden building. And that will give us 30% of the energy we need to use to run that building. So we can be innovative, we can create partnership, and we are really driving those two things because I think that's the only way to get there. Because, like we talked earlier on, the low hanging fruit stuff is probably finished. And so, how do you scale? For example, if I take my rural land decarb, I need access to carbon scientists. I don't have them. So, I'm going to look across the pond and say, okay, which organization has 600 scientists that I can lean on, I can learn from, I can collaborate with. And it's the same if we go up north to the Umber region, it's where we have all of our portfolio in one place. We've got Sunk Island, which is a farm estate. We've got the ports in Miham and Grimsby, which is kind of more industrial decarb. And we've also got our CCUS out there. So you can just see very quickly, even in one place, how we have to just collaborate with the different sectors there, with with the local authorities, with job creation. And so partnership and collaboration is probably the secret sauce to deliver the scale and the sheer size of the ambitions that we need to do. And we recognize that, we need to do that with other people's core competencies. We've got our core competence, they've got theirs. How do we bring those two core competencies to increase the size of the delivery? So yeah.
I think one thing that it comes across from these pilot projects is there's a tremendous amount of learning. Everyone's going to want to know what worked better. Was it the hydrogen fuel cell or the biomass boiler? And I think that's a question. You're kind of creating these. You're doing these test cases that the wider built environment can use. How do they find out about it? How do they keep in touch? I mean, other than coming to our events, which is a great start. How do people find out what you're doing?
I mean, they just need
And
to reach out. I think, part of, to answer that question, that report, I keep coming back to it because we didn't have something like that kind of balance the ambition with the activities. And so we've now done that report. So that is a starting point. And do please, you can share my details. I'm happy to have this conversation. We're very humble enough to learn from others and listen to others, but also share where we've also tried a few things. So, we talked about the hydrogen fuel cell, but in the same site, but a different production, we use HBOs, in terms of the generation. So we're trying both and we're gathering the data. But like everything, most of the decarb activities globally are still kind of 2-3 years old. And so you don't have enough data points, and that's why we're really pushing to get some of these things through before 2030, so then you can see what is laddering up the most, and then you can put all of your effort and all of your resources behind scaling that. But you've got to do the test cases now. You just have to, there is the luxury of doing nothing is probably gone. And there's a cost anyway. There's a do nothing case and there's a cost to do nothing. So yeah. But just reach out, I can put my email address in the chat as well, just so that if people needed to reach out to me, because I think having more and more conversations like this is very helpful.
I think for a lot of frustration in the market will be people hesitant to take that risk, more willing to take the do nothing risk than the do something risk, and a lot of fear around that, and always looking for a pilot project. Like, can I show them this has been done before? Can I show them the data? Can I prove that I can do this thing? So I think these pilot projects are hugely important in giving that confidence, whether that's to funders or to clients across the built environment, for that ability to say, well, look, it might be a historic building, but we can do this. It might be that we have always used diesel, but we can actually use a hydrogen fuel cell. any of those data points too, as you collect them, I think will be so valuable to people. We only have a couple minutes left in the station. Do you want to quickly tell us about Mezzo Hill Barns, and then we'll have to close?
Yeah, no, so this is just the last one I wanted to just share. So this is a timber frame barn that we renovated a few years ago, and because we had the opportunity to do it, we got to kind of good net zero outcome on that one as well in terms of the BREEAM and the neighbors and all of that. So what I'm suggesting here is that whilst you can have, because it was a heritage building, right? So you can still do heritage building in a retrofit way. And we used a lot of the timber frame from our Windsor Great Park as well. So it was a good circular economy story as well. And it's a really proud project that my colleague Kai worked on in terms of the energy efficiency and the calculations. So yeah, just wanted to put that there as well. So it's not everything that is in Regent Street. We also have really great pilot projects outside of Regent Street. So I wanted to just share that a little bit as well.
And again, different aspects of it, like this one, and maybe more circularity. The other one, maybe more heritage windows and
Yeah.
piloting these processes through. Lamy, I really want to thank you for being here. I think that you've shared some really amazing stories, big and small, and it's been really great to hear from you and to hear more about the ambitions and values. Thank you for sharing the report. I'm sure everyone has seen that link. We'll make sure it's in resources. And please keep in touch, because I really want you to come back and tell me about all the data and the pilot projects, and how, as these things come to fruition, it'd be really good to share those learnings.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's kind of strange to be just the two of us. I know there's a big audience behind it. So if you want to reach out, I've dropped my email there. So at least I can get some some feedback, but actually some feedback, comments, and how we get our work to be, continuous improvements, and really feed the learnings from other people as well, other sectors and other practitioners in this sector to feed into our work. We would appreciate that. We don't want to work in a silo. I think we're beyond that silo mentality. I was saying on stage last week, whilst many organizations were designed and trained to have competitive advantage to succeed, I think in the world we are in now, we need cooperative advantage to actually get further on this journey. So anything you have and want to share or link in, then please let me know. Always happy to take a call.
Brilliant invitation, and I think that's true. Resilience is built through community and collaboration. So if you love this session, you're really going to like our next one. We'll be back with a conversation with award-winning journalist Peter Apps about his new book, Homesick: How Housing Broke London and How to Fix It. And where he's going to be talking about building the climate resilience that we need to add to our homes. So see you then in about 5 minutes time. And thanks for joining us.